A neighbor spots something odd on a cold December evening in 1971. Every light in the massive Victorian mansion at 431 Hillside Avenue is blazing. Every single one. The house has been lit up like this for weeks now, day and night. But nobody's seen the List family coming or going. No movement in the windows. No cars in the driveway. Just those lights burning constantly, like someone forgot to turn them off. When police finally enter through an unlocked basement window on December 7th, they discover why. Laid out in the grand ballroom with its ornate Tiffany stained glass skylight are 5 bodies on sleeping bags, lined up like soldiers. A mother, a grandmother, 3 children. They've been there for nearly a month while classical music played on repeat and the lights burned continuously overhead. The father, John List, is gone, vanished. And he won't be found for 18 years. But here's what makes this case truly remarkable. When they finally catch him nearly 2 decades later, it won't be through traditional detective work or DNA evidence. It'll be because of a sculpture, a bust created by an artist who'd never met John List, working from nothing but old photographs and psychological profiles. And that sculpture will be so unnaturally accurate that a neighbor will recognize it instantly on television and turn him in. This is the story of how evil can hide behind a Sunday school smile, and how art and psychology came together to solve one of America's longest manhunts. Let's go back to November 1971. Westfield, New Jersey is exactly what you'd picture when you think of the American dream. Tree-lined streets, expensive homes, families who go to church on Sunday and country clubs on Saturday. It's located just 16 miles outside of Manhattan, making it perfect for professionals who want suburban life while working in the city. Since 1963, Westfield had recorded almost no serious crimes. It was safe, peaceful, prosperous. John List was 46 years old, worked as a bank vice president and comptroller, taught Sunday school at the local Lutheran church. He wore wire-rimmed glasses and was so uptight that neighbors said he mowed the lawn in a dress shirt and tie. Think about that for a second. This man couldn't even relax enough to do yard work in casual clothes. Everything had to be perfect, controlled, proper. His wife Helen was 46, though she looked older. She had severe health problems that were slowly getting worse. She was nearly blind in one eye and had mobility issues that made it difficult for her to get around the massive house. His mother Alma, 84 years old, lived on the 3rd floor in her own apartment. She dominated John's entire life, controlling his decisions, shaping his rigid worldview. And then there were the children. 16-year-old Patricia wanted to be an actress, a dream that horrified her conservative father, who saw the entertainment industry as morally corrupt. 15-year-old John Jr. played soccer and was popular at Westfield High School. 13-year-old Freddie was still in middle school, innocent and unaware of how his family was crumbling. They lived in a mansion called Breeze Knoll. 19 rooms spread across 3 floors, marble fireplaces in several rooms. A grand ballroom with that Tiffany stained glass skylight worth over $100,000 even back in 1971, equivalent to about $600,000 today. The house sat on the highest hill in Westfield, visible from blocks away, a monument to achievement and prosperity. It was the most expensive house in the neighborhood, but behind those walls and beneath that beautiful skylight, everything was falling apart in ways the neighbors could never have imagined. John had lost his job at the bank months earlier. He'd been fired for being too cold, too awkward with co-workers, too unable to connect with other human beings. His superiors found him disinterested and incapable of basic social interaction. But John List couldn't admit this failure to his family. The shame was too great. His self-image as the successful provider, the pillar of the community, couldn't survive that truth. So every morning, he'd put on his suit and tie, kiss his wife goodbye, grab his briefcase, and leave the house like he was going to work. Then he'd spend the entire day sitting at the train station reading newspapers. Hours and hours of pretending, maintaining the lie, living in complete denial. The money was running out fast. Bills were piling up on his desk. The mortgage was months behind. Collection letters were arriving daily. The heating bills alone for that massive Victorian were astronomical. And in John List's rigid Lutheran mind, the thought of his family finding out, the humiliation of losing that giant mansion, the shame of going on welfare, that was worse than ending their lives. He convinced himself that poverty would corrupt his family's souls, that losing their home would expose them to the moral decay he saw everywhere. In 1970s America, Patricia's dream of acting represented everything he despised about modern culture. Helen's health problems were draining their finances. His mother was expensive to care for. In his twisted logic, he concluded that ending them would be an act of mercy. He'd send their souls to heaven before the world could corrupt them, before failure could taint them. On November 9th, 1971, he made his decision. The morning started normally. The kids got ready for school, gathering books and lunches. Helen went about her routine, probably taking her medication. But John List had already retrieved 2 handguns from his desk drawer. A 9mm Steyr pistol and his father's old Colt .22 revolver. He'd been planning this for weeks, maybe months. This wasn't spontaneous. This was calculated. Once everyone left the house, he went to find Helen. She was in the kitchen, probably making coffee or cleaning dishes. He walked up behind her. She never saw it coming. He shot her once in the back of the head. She dropped instantly, collapsing to the kitchen floor. No struggle, no chance to defend herself. Just gone in an instant. Then he climbed 2 flights of stairs to his mother's 3rd-floor apartment. This was the woman who'd controlled him his entire life, who'd shaped his rigid worldview. Alma looked up, probably confused about why her son was pointing a gun at her face. Maybe she said something. Maybe she tried to ask what he was doing. We'll never know. He shot her above the left eye. She fell in her apartment, the space where she'd ruled over him, finally becoming her final resting place. But John List wasn't done. Not even close. He dragged Helen's body from the kitchen to the grand ballroom. Can you imagine the scene? This uptight accountant in his dress shirt, dragging his wife's body across floors, positioning her carefully on a sleeping bag beneath that beautiful Tiffany skylight. He cleaned up the blood meticulously. He wanted the house to look normal for when the children came home. Every detail had to be perfect. Then he ate lunch. Think about that. He made himself a sandwich after ending his wife and mother. He sat at the kitchen table, probably at the same spot where Helen had fallen, and calmly ate while planning the rest of his day. He was treating this like any other task on his to-do list. After lunch, he drove to Westfield High School to watch his oldest son play in a soccer game. He parked his car, walked to the field, and sat in the bleachers like any normal father, cheering probably, acting concerned about plays and scores, making small talk with other parents perhaps, all while knowing what he'd already done and what he was about to do. The other parents there had no idea that they were sitting next to a man who'd already ended 2 people and was planning to end 3 more. After the game ended, he approached 15-year-old John Jr. The boy was probably excited, talking about the game, maybe asking if they could stop for food on the way home. They drove back to Breeze Knoll together, father and son having what appeared to be a normal conversation. And as his son walked into the house, probably still chattering about soccer, John List shot him in the back of the head. But John Jr. didn't go down clean. The bullet didn't end him instantly. The boy fought. He struggled. He turned to face his father, probably in shock and confusion and pain. Why was Dad pointing a gun at him? What was happening? The terror in that moment must have been unimaginable. In response, John List emptied the gun into his own son. 10 shots total. 10 bullets to make absolutely sure the boy who'd trusted him, who'd loved him, who'd just played soccer with his father watching, was gone. Then came the waiting, the most chilling part of his entire plan. List dragged his son's body to the ballroom and arranged it on another sleeping bag. Then he waited for his other children to come home, knowing exactly what he was going to do. Patricia arrived home from school around 3:30. She probably called out for her mom as she walked in. Maybe she noticed something was off. Maybe she saw her brother's body. We don't know. But she didn't get a chance to run or scream. Her father shot her in the back of the head. She was 16 years old with dreams of the stage, and she died in the hallway of her own home. 13-year-old Freddie came through the door last. Same thing, back of the head. The youngest, the most innocent, eliminated by the man who was supposed to protect him above all else. With methodical precision that would make your skin crawl, John List arranged all 4 family members in the ballroom alongside their mother and grandmother, each on their own sleeping bag, lined up in a perfect row beneath that stunning Tiffany skylight. He turned on the radio to a classical music station and left it playing. He lowered the thermostat to 50 degrees to preserve the bodies, to slow decomposition. Then he sat down at his desk and spent hours writing a 5-page letter to his pastor explaining everything. In the letter, he detailed his reasons: the financial problems, his belief that his family was straying from righteous paths, his conviction that ending them was an act of salvation, sending them to heaven before the world could corrupt them, before Patricia could pursue her sinful dream of becoming an actress, before the humiliation of welfare could destroy their souls. He left the lights on throughout the entire mansion, every single one. He wanted it to look like the family was home, going about their normal activities. He canceled the milk delivery, the newspaper, the mail. He called the children's schools and left messages saying they'd be visiting their sick grandmother in North Carolina for a few weeks. He typed letters to his mother's relatives with the same story. Then John Emil List walked out of that house with a suitcase, drove to New York, left his green 1963 Chevrolet Impala at John F. Kennedy Airport, and disappeared into America like a ghost. He had a full month before anyone would find what he'd done. Nearly 4 weeks went by. Neighbors noticed the lights burning constantly, but assumed the Lists were just wasteful with electricity. Some thought maybe they'd left them on while traveling to visit relatives. But as November turned to December, people started getting suspicious. Every light in that massive house had been on day and night for weeks. No movement, no cars, no activity whatsoever. It wasn't until the light bulbs started burning out one by one, the house growing darker in sections, that someone finally called the police. On December 7th, 1971, officers arrived at 431 Hillside Avenue. They knocked on doors. No answer. They peered through windows. Nothing. Finally, they found an unlocked basement window and climbed through. What they found in that ballroom would haunt them forever. 5 bodies, remarkably preserved by the cold temperature List had created. Classical music still playing softly from the radio. Light bulbs still burning overhead. The smell was terrible, but the bodies were still intact enough for identification. Helen List, 46. Patricia List, 16. Frederick List, 13. John List Jr., 15. All shot execution style. And upstairs on the third floor, Alma List, 84, shot in her apartment. Westfield, the peaceful suburban town that hadn't seen a violent crime in years, suddenly became the site of one of New Jersey's most notorious mass eliminations since the Lindbergh baby kidnapping. News crews descended from everywhere. The story made national headlines. A father had systematically eliminated his entire family and vanished without a trace. The FBI launched a massive manhunt. John List's photograph appeared in post offices nationwide. Agents followed hundreds of leads. Tips poured in from every state, but they all led nowhere. And investigators faced a significant problem that made this case especially difficult. John List had an incredibly unremarkable appearance. Thinning hair, glasses, average height and build. No tattoos, no distinguishing marks, except for a small surgical scar behind his right ear. He looked like every middle-aged accountant in America. There were probably 10,000 men who matched his general description in any major city. And he'd had a full month head start to disappear. List fled to Denver, Colorado, traveling by train and bus to avoid leaving a paper trail. He found work as a night cook at a Holiday Inn, living in a trailer under his new identity, Robert Peter Clark. He'd chosen the name carefully, common enough to blend in, professional enough to match his background. He told people his wife had passed from cancer and he had no children. Eventually, he got an accounting job because that's who John List fundamentally was. He couldn't stop being an accountant any more than he could stop being a rigid Lutheran. He rejoined a Lutheran church because his identity was wrapped up in that religious framework. He attended services every Sunday, volunteered, became a respected member of the congregation. To everyone who met him, Bob Clark seemed like a normal, decent, devout man. At church, he met Dolores Miller, a widow who found Bob Clark to be quiet, respectful, and devoted. They dated. They fell in love. In 1985, they got married in a small ceremony. Dolores had no idea the mild-mannered accountant she'd married had ended his entire family 14 years earlier. When she asked about his past, he explained calmly that his first wife had passed from cancer and he had no children. The lie came easily to him. He'd been living it so long that it felt like truth. In February 1988, they moved to Richmond, Virginia, settling into a modest home in the Brandermill neighborhood. Bob Clark lived quietly, paid his taxes on time, attended church regularly, helped neighbors with accounting questions. He was the perfect citizen, the perfect husband, the perfect neighbor. Nobody suspected anything. Meanwhile, back in New Jersey, the FBI's case grew colder with each passing year. 18 years went by. John List had successfully erased his former identity and built a completely new life. In 1989, desperate FBI investigators approached the producers of America's Most Wanted with the John List case. The show's creator, John Walsh, was interested. The case was compelling, haunting, and unsolved. But they faced an impossible challenge. How do you show viewers what a man looks like after 18 years of aging? All the photographs of John List were from 1971. He'd be 64 years old now. His appearance would have changed dramatically. The answer came from Frank Bender, a forensic sculptor from Philadelphia with an unusual reputation. Bender wasn't your typical forensic artist. He was self-taught, having stumbled into the field almost by accident when he volunteered to reconstruct a victim's face during evening art classes at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. He worked in a converted butcher shop in Philadelphia, surrounding himself with skulls and clay and tools. But what made Bender special wasn't just technical skill. He used intuition, psychology, almost supernatural insight. People who worked with him described his process as more prophecy than sculpture. He'd stare at a skull or photograph for hours, letting impressions form. Then suddenly, he'd see the person. Not just their face, but their character, their personality, their essence. For the Liszt case, Bender partnered with forensic psychologist Richard Walter. Together, they dove deep into John Liszt's psychological profile. They analyzed everything: his German Lutheran upbringing, his dominating mother who'd never let him develop independence, his history of failure in social situations, his rigid, unbending personality that couldn't adapt to change or handle setbacks. Walter painted a psychological picture. Liszt would be consumed not by guilt over his crimes, but by anxiety over being caught. He'd want to project intelligence and respectability he'd never actually possessed. He'd remain uptight, controlled, wearing his mask of normalcy like armor. He'd attend church religiously. He'd follow rules meticulously. He'd live quietly, avoiding attention while maintaining the appearance of being successful and proper. Using this psychological roadmap, Bender began sculpting. He studied photographs of Liszt's parents to understand his genetics and how they'd affect aging. He added sagging jowls that would come with age and gravity, a receding hairline pushed back significantly from the 1971 photos. He accounted for how the skin would lose elasticity, how the face would elongate slightly with age. He researched how the small surgical scar behind Liszt's right ear would change over time, becoming more visible as the skin thinned and aged. But the masterstroke, the glasses. Bender had no logical reason to predict specific glasses. The photographs from 1971 showed Liszt wearing standard wire-rimmed glasses. But Bender, using pure psychological insight, predicted Liszt would choose thick, dark-framed glasses, the kind that made someone look more intelligent, more important, more professional. The kind that screamed, "Trust me, I'm successful," without saying a word. Bender worked for weeks on the sculpture. He built the face in clay, cast it in plaster, painted it with incredible detail to make the skin tones look real. When he finished, it was like he'd traveled 18 years into the future and photographed John Liszt. The downturned mouth showing anxiety. The thinning hair in the exact pattern genetics would produce. The jowls, the elongated face, those distinctive thick-framed glasses. The sculpture was so realistic that people who saw it found it unsettling. On May 21, 1989, America's Most Wanted aired the Liszt episode. Millions of Americans tuned in to watch the story of a man who'd eliminated his entire family and vanished 18 years earlier. The show detailed the eliminations, the manhunt, the 18 years of failure to find him. Then Frank Bender's sculpture appeared on screen. In Richmond, Virginia, Wanda Flannery sat down to watch television with her daughter. When that sculpture appeared, Wanda's blood went cold. Her hands started shaking. She knew that face. She'd seen it countless times. Her former neighbor, Bob Clark, looked exactly like that sculpture. Not similar, not kind of like it, exactly like it. Down to those thick-framed glasses Bender had somehow predicted. Everything clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Clark was an accountant. Check. He was a Lutheran who attended church every Sunday without fail. Check. He had a scar behind his right ear. Check. He wore those exact thick-framed glasses. Check. His mannerisms, his obsessive neatness, his rigid personality, his complete devotion to church. It all suddenly made sinister sense. The man who'd seemed like the perfect neighbor was actually one of America's most wanted mass eliminators. Within hours of the broadcast, Wanda was on the phone with the FBI, her voice trembling as she provided Clark's current address in Richmond, his workplace, every detail she could remember. The agents who took her call knew immediately they had their breakthrough. After 18 years of false leads and dead ends, after hundreds of tips that went nowhere, Frank Bender's artistic prophecy had finally pointed them straight to their target. The FBI moved quickly but carefully. On June 1st, 1989, just 11 days after the America's Most Wanted broadcast, agents descended on Richmond. They found Robert Peter Clark at his accounting office, calmly working at his desk as if the past 18 years had never happened. When agents approached him and identified themselves, Clark looked up with that same mild-mannered expression he always wore. They asked if he was John Emil List. He denied it immediately and insistently. He insisted he was Robert Peter Clark. He'd been Robert Clark for 18 years. That identity was real to him now. He maintained the lie even as they arrested him. But fingerprints don't lie. Neither did that distinctive surgical scar behind his right ear. The forensic evidence was undeniable. Bob Clark and John List were the same person, and his carefully constructed new life was about to collapse just as completely as the old one had. When newspapers published comparison photos of the arrested Clark next to Bender's sculpture, the resemblance was so perfect it seemed supernatural. Every single detail matched. The glasses were identical. The jowls were in exactly the right places. The hairline had receded precisely as predicted. The expression, the elongated face, even tiny details like the set of the mouth and the anxious look in the eyes. Bender had somehow looked across 18 years and predicted exactly what a mass eliminator would become. The trial List was extradited back to New Jersey to face trial. The proceedings revealed the full scope of his delusion. He showed no remorse for ending his entire family. He explained calmly that he'd saved them, sent them to heaven before the world could corrupt them. When asked why he didn't take his own life afterward, he explained matter-of-factly that ending himself would be a sin that would prevent him from getting to heaven. He wanted to eventually reunite with his family in the afterlife. Think about that logic for a second. He believed ending 5 people, including 3 children, was acceptable to God. But ending himself? That would be wrong. Prosecutors painted a different picture. They argued List was a narcissistic man who ended his family not out of love or religious conviction, but because they'd become inconvenient obstacles to his self-image. Unable to face failure, unable to admit he'd lost his job, unable to humble himself and ask for help or accept a reduced standard of living. He'd chosen to eliminate the evidence of his inadequacy rather than confront his own shortcomings. The jury deliberated and reached their verdict: guilty on 5 counts of first-degree ending life. Superior Court Judge William L.A. Wertheimer sentenced John List to 5 consecutive life terms, making him ineligible for parole for 125 years. At 64 years old, he'd spend the rest of his life in prison. John Emil List spent 19 years in New Jersey State Prison. He maintained his rigid Lutheran beliefs, attended prison chapel services, joined Bible study groups. He showed no real remorse, only regret at being caught. On March 21, 2008, John List passed in prison at age 82 from pneumonia complications. The New Jersey Star-Ledger called him the boogeyman of Westfield. Frank Bender continued solving cold cases nationwide. Frank's bust of John List really launched America's Most Wanted, host John Walsh said. But in 2009, Bender was diagnosed with pleural mesothelioma from asbestos exposure during his Navy service. Despite cancer, he kept working. He co-founded the Vidocq Society in 1990 for forensic experts to solve cold cases. Frank Bender passed on July 28, 2011, at age 70. His success rate was estimated at 85%. In 2008, Walsh donated Bender's bust of List to the National Museum of Crime and Punishment. It's now at Alcatraz East Crime Museum in Tennessee. Breeze Knoll burned down in August 1972, 9 months after the bodies were discovered. Arson was suspected, but never solved. The fire destroyed everything, including the Tiffany skylight worth $570,000 today. A new house was built in 1974. Locals still call it the List House. Children still won't walk past it. Westfield has another dark connection. Blocks away is the Watcher House, where a family received threatening letters in 2014. The 2022 Netflix series The Watcher featured a character based on List. Comedian Conan O'Brien revealed in June 2025 that he attended List's trial in 1990 while writing for Saturday Night Live. Dolores Clark divorced List and disappeared from public life. The List children are buried in Fairview Cemetery in Westfield. Alma List was buried in Michigan. The John List case teaches us that evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it wears a suit and tie and teaches Sunday school. List wasn't a monster who snapped. He was a man who built a facade while rotting inside. His rigid beliefs gave him a framework to justify the unjustifiable. His need to appear successful was narcissism so deep he'd rather end 5 lives than admit failure. What's chilling is the planning. He ate lunch between endings. He watched his son play soccer hours before ending the boy's life. The case shows criminals can't escape their nature. List changed his name and moved across the country, but couldn't stop being who he was. He joined another Lutheran church, became an accountant again. His core identity bled through, allowing Bender to predict exactly what he'd become. But the most important lesson is about justice's persistence. For 18 years, List thought he'd gotten away with it. But he didn't account for Frank Bender, America's Most Wanted, or a neighbor paying attention. John List spent his final 19 years in prison, unable to run from what he'd done. The mild-mannered accountant learned a terrible truth. Some sins are written too deeply to ever be erased. The ballroom at Breeze Knoll is gone, but the memory remains. 5 people eliminated by someone who was supposed to love them. And one eliminator who learned that no matter how far you run, the truth will find you, even if it takes 18 years and a sculpture to make it happen.